He was paid to watch over a wild Apache woman, but when he saw her, he knew he had to set her free. John had always been a man of duty. Ever since he could remember, he had followed rules, obeyed orders, and trusted that doing what was expected of him was the right path. Life on the frontier was not easy. The towns were small, and dangers were everywhere: wild animals, harsh weather, and occasional clashes with those who lived freely in the wild lands around. He had grown used to a life of discipline, carrying his responsibility like a shield, protecting those who asked for help, and never questioning the orders he was given. It was a bright morning when the messenger arrived at the settlement, riding hard across the dusty roads. John was in the town's main square, cleaning his gear, when he saw the rider approach. The horse's hooves kicked up clouds of dirt, and the rider barely slowed before dismounting and handing John a sealed letter. The seal bore the mark of the town's council. John recognized it immediately. Something about the messenger's urgency made his chest tighten with curiosity and a hint of unease. He opened the letter carefully. The message was short, clear, and carried a weight he hadn't anticipated. He was to travel to the outpost at the edge of the settlement and watch over a captured Apache woman. The letter described her as wild and dangerous, and warned that she should not be trusted. She was to be held until further instructions came from the council. John felt a strange mix of emotions: duty, fear, and curiosity, but above all, a sense that this task would not be simple. That evening, John prepared for his journey. He packed lightly, taking only what was necessary for travel and survival. A strong horse, a bedroll, some food, and a rifle were all he needed. Yet, as he tightened the straps of his pack and checked the saddle, he felt a strange anticipation, a pull he couldn't explain. Something about this assignment felt different from the others he had completed. He shook off the feeling, blaming it on the isolation of the frontier and the long hours of travel ahead. The next morning, he rode out of the town, leaving behind the familiar streets and the chatter of townsfolk. The road was long, winding through hills and open plains, with the mountains standing like silent watchers in the distance. The air was crisp, and the sunlight glinted off the streams and rocks along the way. John's mind wandered, thinking of what he would encounter at the outpost. He pictured a woman, defiant and angry, perhaps unwilling to cooperate. He imagined himself standing firm, keeping her in check, and fulfilling his duty without question. Hours passed as he rode, the horse's hooves striking the ground in steady rhythm. Occasionally, he would stop to check the map, ensuring he stayed on the correct path. The frontier was beautiful, wild, and dangerous. John had always respected it, knowing that even the smallest mistake could lead to disaster. He admired the strength it took to survive here, the way nature could be both kind and cruel, and the way people adapted to its challenges. He thought of the Apache people he had encountered before, strong, skilled, and proud. The letter had described the woman as wild, but John wondered what that really meant. Was she untamed in spirit, or was she simply misunderstood? By late afternoon, John arrived at the outpost. It was a small, sturdy structure built at the edge of the forest, surrounded by high wooden fences. Guards stood at the corners, watching for any movement from the surrounding woods. The air smelled of smoke and earth, and the faint sound of water from a nearby stream added a peaceful touch to the otherwise tense atmosphere. John dismounted and approached the gate, introducing himself to the sentries. They nodded, acknowledging his arrival, and led him to the central area where she was being held. And then John saw her. She was not what he expected. The letter had prepared him for a fearful, angry, perhaps desperate woman. But when he looked at her, he saw strength, intelligence, and something almost untouchable, a spirit that refused to be confined. Her eyes met his with quiet intensity, not fear. She stood tall, her posture calm and confident, as if the walls around her did not exist. Her hair fell freely around her shoulders, and her movements were precise, controlled, and purposeful. Even in captivity, she carried herself with dignity, and John could not help but feel a pang of admiration. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other. John felt a strange shift inside him, a sudden awareness that this task would be unlike any other. He had been trained to follow orders without hesitation, but something about her presence made him pause. He realized that she was not just a prisoner. She was a person with her own mind, her own will, and her own freedom that had been taken from her. The first days were difficult. John observed her from a distance, learning her patterns, noting how she moved within the space she had. She did not shout or plead. She simply existed with an unbroken spirit. Sometimes she would sit by the stream, watching the water flow, lost in thought. Other times she would pace slowly, her eyes scanning the trees beyond the fences, as if imagining a world she could no longer touch. John felt a growing respect for her resilience and a growing conflict within himself. How could someone so strong, so alive, be treated as a threat? He tried to follow his orders, to be the watchful guard as instructed. But every day, he felt the walls of the outpost closing in around him, not just around her, but around his own conscience. The townspeople had said she was dangerous, but John saw no danger in her actions. He saw a wildness of spirit, yes, but it was a beauty, a connection to life and freedom that he had never truly appreciated before. As the days turned into weeks, John began small, silent acts of kindness. He brought extra food without being asked, left water near her resting area, and never spoke harshly. She did not respond immediately, but sometimes he would catch her glance, a flicker of acknowledgement, a small sign that she understood his intentions. Slowly, a quiet understanding began to form between them. They did not need words. The connection was simple and profound. Respect, recognition, and the unspoken truth that one person could not own the spirit of another. One evening, as the sun set and painted the sky with shades of orange and red, John sat by the fence, watching her walk along the edge of the enclosure. The wind carried the scent of pine and earth, and for the first time in weeks, he felt a sense of clarity. He realized that his task was no longer just a job. It had become a question of morality, of conscience, of doing what was right rather than what was ordered. The thought both frightened and exhilarated him. That night, John could not sleep. He lay on his bedroll, staring at the ceiling, replaying the day in his mind. He thought of her strength, her independence, her quiet dignity. He thought of the town, the orders, and the consequences of defying them. And then he realized something he could not ignore. He could not simply watch her. He could not stand by while her freedom was denied. Something deep inside him shifted, a determination forming that he would not have anticipated a few weeks ago. The first part of John's journey had begun not with a simple assignment, but with a realization. He understood now that some tasks were more than orders. They were tests of character, of morality, and of courage. And as he drifted into a restless sleep, he knew that the real challenge had only just begun. The Apache woman was more than a prisoner. She was a symbol of freedom, strength, and the power of the human spirit. And John had already begun to see that his role was no longer to guard her, but to understand her, respect her, and perhaps, in time, help her reclaim what had been taken from her. Days passed at the outpost, each one stretching long and quiet, yet full of unspoken tension. John's routine remained the same. He checked the fences, made sure the woman had food and water, and reported to the settlement as instructed. But beneath the surface, his thoughts were no longer occupied by the simplicity of duty. Every day he watched her, noticing small details that revealed her intelligence, her awareness, and her strength. She was not loud or violent. She did not demand attention or cause trouble. Instead, she observed everything around her, moving with a grace that seemed natural, effortless, as if the land itself guided her steps. When she walked near the stream, Her reflection in the water seemed alive, almost as if the river recognized her presence. John noticed the way she paused to touch the rough bark of a tree, or how she crouched to watch a bird land on a branch. These were small acts, almost invisible, yet they showed a deep connection with the world that he had never seen in anyone before. John began to realize that the townspeople had misunderstood her. They called her wild and dangerous because she did not obey their rules, because she lived according to her own heart and instincts. But John saw no danger in her actions. Instead, he saw courage, wisdom, and a freedom that many people in the settlement lacked. He began to question the words he had been given, wondering if he had been sent to punish the wrong person. He tried to speak to her sometimes, though the conversations were limited. She would not answer with many words, but her eyes, her expressions, and her gestures communicated more than any language could. There was a silent understanding forming between them. John would bring her fresh water, and she would nod in acknowledgement. He would leave extra blankets at night, and she would carefully fold them, placing them where he could find them. It was a quiet exchange, subtle but meaningful. One morning, John noticed her sitting alone on a large rock near the edge of the enclosure. She had her arms wrapped around her knees and her eyes fixed on the distant mountains. The sunlight cast a warm glow around her, highlighting the strength in her posture and the softness in her expression. John approached slowly, careful not to startle her. He asked gently, "Do you miss it? The land beyond this place?" She looked at him, and though she did not answer with words, her eyes spoke volumes. A sadness, deep and profound, lingered there, a longing for freedom and a life untouched by confinement. John felt a tightening in his chest. He realized that her spirit was not broken, but it could be wounded if kept here for too long. She was not angry at him. She did not lash out. She simply existed with quiet dignity, holding onto her sense of self despite the walls that surrounded her. And for the first time, John understood the weight of captivity, not just physical, but emotional, mental, and spiritual. To hold someone like her against their will was not just wrong, it was cruel. The days turned into weeks, and John found himself thinking about her constantly. He watched how she interacted with the world around her, the way she cared for the small animals that wandered near, how she avoided harming anything unnecessarily, and how she seemed to understand the rhythm of nature in a way he never had. Her intelligence and awareness were striking, and John admired her more with each passing day. He began to realize that his feelings for her were changing. He no longer saw her as a task or a responsibility. He saw her as a person worthy of respect, dignity, and above all, freedom. The other guards at the outpost began to notice John's change in behavior. He was no longer as rigid, as strict, or as distant. He smiled more, spoke less harshly, and spent more time observing her than patrolling the fences. They whispered among themselves, curious about his unusual attachment to the woman, but John did not care about their opinions. He was learning something more important than rules or orders. He was learning about empathy, understanding, and the power of seeing someone as a human being rather than a prisoner. One afternoon, a sudden commotion broke the quiet of the outpost. A group of townsfolk had arrived, intending to inspect the woman and ensure she had not caused trouble. They carried themselves with authority and suspicion, their eyes sharp and judgmental. John watched as they approached, feeling a mixture of fear and determination. He knew that if they saw her as dangerous, they would demand stricter confinement or punishment. But when the woman saw them, she did not flinch. She stood tall, her gaze steady, her hands relaxed at her sides. There was no threat, no anger, no fear, only a calm, quiet presence that seemed to challenge anyone who underestimated her. John felt a surge of protectiveness. He stepped forward, speaking firmly to the townsfolk, explaining that she had not caused any harm and that she was not a danger to anyone. His voice carried conviction, a rare quality that surprised even himself. The townsfolk grumbled but eventually left, satisfied that she posed no immediate threat. As they walked away, John looked at her and saw a flicker of gratitude in her eyes. It was brief, almost imperceptible, but he felt it deeply. In that moment, he realized that trust was forming between them, a trust that was fragile but powerful. As the days continued, John began to think more seriously about her freedom. He understood that keeping her here was not just unjust, it was morally wrong. He began to consider what it would mean to help her escape, to return her to the land she belonged to, the life she had been denied. But the thought frightened him. The settlement would not forgive disobedience, and the wilderness was full of dangers. Yet the more he thought about it, the more he realized that he could not stand by and do nothing. He had a choice, to follow orders or to follow his conscience, and deep down he knew what the right choice was. At night he would sit by the small fire he built outside her enclosure, thinking about her life before captivity. He imagined the forests, rivers, and mountains she had known. He imagined the people she loved, the traditions she followed, and the freedom she had once enjoyed. Each thought made him more determined to act, but also more aware of the risks. He knew that helping her escape would not be easy. He would have to plan carefully, consider every detail, and anticipate every danger. But he also knew that it was necessary. Freedom, he realized, was worth any risk. One evening, as the sky turned shades of purple and gold, he noticed her sitting quietly, staring at the horizon. She seemed to sense something in him, a thought, a feeling, a resolve. For a brief moment, their eyes met, and John felt a silent understanding pass between them. Words were not needed. She did not ask him to help her, and he did not promise anything. But the connection was undeniable, a bond formed through respect, observation, and a shared awareness of the injustice surrounding them. The next few days were filled with careful observation and planning. John paid attention to the routines of the other guards, the patterns of the townsfolk, and the natural layout of the land around the outpost. He studied every detail, imagining how an escape might unfold. At the same time, he continued to treat the woman with kindness and respect, building a quiet trust that would be essential if he was to succeed. He spoke to her softly sometimes, telling her small stories about the land, the animals, and the sky. She listened with quiet attention, occasionally responding with a nod or a brief smile, but mostly with eyes that seemed to see far beyond the walls that confined her. John realized that the more he learned about her, the more he admired her. She was intelligent, resilient, and courageous. She faced confinement without losing her dignity, and she never gave up hope. Her spirit, he thought, was something the world should not be allowed to control. And as he watched her one evening, sitting calmly by the fence as the wind whispered through the trees, he made a silent promise to himself. He would do everything in his power to set her free. The days continued in this delicate balance: routine, observation, planning, and quiet moments of connection. John knew the challenges ahead would be immense, but he felt a growing certainty that he was on the right path. The woman had not asked for his help, but her very presence had inspired him to act. She had awakened something in him, a sense of justice, courage, and the understanding that freedom was a right, not a privilege. As part 2 comes to a close, John's resolve is clear. He is no longer just a guard following orders. He is a protector, a witness to the strength of the human spirit, and a man preparing to take a leap of courage that will change both their lives forever. The bond between him and the Apache woman has grown beyond words, built on respect, empathy, and a shared awareness of what it means to be truly alive and free. The days at the outpost had grown heavy with tension, not because of any immediate danger, but because of the storm, building quietly inside John's mind. He had watched her for weeks now, learning her habits, understanding her character, and feeling a deep respect for her strength. But the more he observed, the more he realized that he could no longer simply stand by and follow orders. His conscience had begun to speak louder than his sense of duty, and every decision became a test of his courage and morality. He walked the fences in the early morning light, the cold wind brushing against his face. The snow-capped mountains in the distance glimmered under the sun, and the forest beyond the outpost seemed alive with secrets and possibilities. John's thoughts, however, were not on the beauty of the wilderness. They were on her. He remembered the way she had watched the horizon the previous evening, as if she could see a world beyond the walls that confined her. Her eyes had held no fear, only patience and quiet understanding. She had not asked for freedom, but he could sense it in her presence. She longed to return to the life that had been stolen from her. That afternoon, the tension in the outpost increased. A messenger arrived from the settlement, bringing new orders. The council wanted regular updates on her behavior, and they hinted at stricter control if she showed any sign of resistance. John read the letter carefully, feeling a mix of anger and determination. He could see the intentions of the council clearly. They wanted to suppress her spirit, to control what could not be controlled. And John realized that following these orders would make him complicit in an injustice he could no longer accept. As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the wooden walls of the outpost, John sat near her enclosure, thinking. The woman was there, her gaze focused on a small group of birds perched on a nearby tree. She did not acknowledge him immediately, but her calm presence was comforting. For a long time, they sat in silence, sharing a space filled with understanding rather than words. John could feel the pull of his conscience growing stronger. He could not allow her to remain here, trapped and watched like a possession. He had to act, but the path forward was uncertain and dangerous. John began to plan carefully. He knew the guards' routines, the timing of the townsfolk's visits, and the safest paths through the surrounding wilderness. Every detail mattered. One mistake could lead to capture, punishment, or worse. He spent hours mapping the land, imagining the steps they would take, the obstacles they would face, and the ways to overcome them. It was not a simple task. The outpost was designed to prevent escape, and the wilderness beyond was both beautiful and treacherous. Yet he felt a sense of clarity he had never experienced before. He knew what he had to do, even if he did not yet know how. During these days of planning, John also observed her closely, learning what he could about her habits and instincts. She was alert at all times, sensitive to the changes in the environment and aware of every sound and movement. Her intelligence and awareness were remarkable, and John realized that any plan would require her full cooperation, even if it was unspoken. Trust was essential. He could not force her, coerce her, or trick her. She had to choose freedom for herself, and he would have to guide her without taking it from her. Their silent communication grew stronger. One afternoon, John noticed her handling a small bundle of herbs near the fence. She moved carefully, almost reverently, arranging them in neat patterns. John asked softly, "Are you making a medicine?" She glanced at him briefly and then nodded, a small smile touching her lips. It was a simple exchange, but it filled John with hope. He realized that she was not just surviving. She was living with intention, maintaining her connection to her culture and her life beyond the outpost. He admired her resilience and felt a growing responsibility to protect it. The nights were the hardest for John. He would lie awake on his bedroll, listening to the wind whistle through the trees, imagining the dangers they could face. Wild animals, treacherous terrain, and the ever-present threat of discovery weighed heavily on his mind. Yet these thoughts did not deter him. Instead, they strengthened his resolve. He knew that he could not allow fear to control his actions. Courage, he realized, was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. One evening, a small incident heightened the urgency of his decision. A group of guards discovered a broken branch near the enclosure, evidence that someone, or something, had been exploring the perimeter. The townsfolk were quick to suspect her. They demanded stricter confinement, harsher measures, and constant surveillance. John stood firm, insisting that she had done nothing wrong. But the council's influence was strong, and he knew that sooner or later they would attempt to punish her or increase her captivity. The thought of her being hurt or humiliated filled him with anger and determination. He could not allow it to happen. John's internal conflict grew. He felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him, yet he also felt the growing sense of purpose that came with knowing what was right. He could follow orders and protect himself, or he could follow his conscience and protect her. Every day, the choice became clearer, even if the consequences were frightening. He realized that his life would never be the same after this moment. Whatever path he chose, he would be forever changed. During this time, the woman began to show signs of understanding his intentions. She did not speak directly about escape, but her actions became more deliberate. She observed the land beyond the fence, testing her surroundings, and occasionally moving closer to him when he approached. John noticed these small gestures and took them as signs that she trusted him. Trust, he knew, would be the foundation of any plan. Without it, freedom would be impossible. John also reflected on the nature of freedom itself. He thought about the life she had been forced to leave behind, the forests, rivers, and mountains that had shaped her spirit. He thought about the people she had known, the traditions she had followed, and the sense of belonging that had been denied to her. And he realized that true freedom was more than escaping walls. It was the right to live fully, to make choices, and to exist without fear. Helping her regain that freedom had become his moral imperative. The tension at the outpost was palpable. Guards moved with suspicion. The townsfolk whispered about the wild woman and the guard who had become strangely protective of her. John felt eyes on him constantly, yet he did not falter. Every glance, every suspicion, strengthened his resolve. He knew that the challenge ahead would require patience, courage, and careful timing. He also knew that he could not succeed without her cooperation. She was strong, intelligent, and aware of the world beyond the fence. Any misstep could jeopardize everything. One night, under a sky filled with stars, John sat quietly near her enclosure. The air was cool, the only sounds the whispering wind and the distant call of an owl. He looked at her, and for the first time he allowed himself to imagine the possibility of freedom, not just for her, but for both of them. He imagined the vast wilderness, the flowing rivers, and the open plains where she could move without restriction. He imagined her smiling freely, no longer confined by walls or fear. And he realized that this vision, though risky, was worth every danger, every fear, and every consequence. As Part 3 draws to a close, John stands at a crossroads. The conflict between duty and conscience has reached its peak. He knows the settlement expects obedience, but his heart demands justice. The woman has not asked for his help, yet her presence has awakened something in him, a recognition of courage, dignity, and the power of the human spirit. He knows that action is required, and that the next steps will define not only her fate, but his own. The escape, he realizes, is no longer a possibility. It is a responsibility, and he is prepared to face whatever comes to set her free. The night was quiet, darker than usual, with only the faint glow of the moon casting soft silver light across the outpost. John sat by the fire, feeling the weight of his decision pressing heavily on his shoulders. For weeks, he had observed, learned, and planned, and now the time had come to act. Every detail mattered. Every movement, every sound, every choice could mean the difference between freedom and capture. He knew the risks. The settlement would not forgive disobedience, and the wilderness beyond the walls held its own dangers. Yet the thought of leaving her here, trapped and watched like a caged bird, was unbearable. He had been watching her carefully that evening. She had been sitting near the stream, her hands resting lightly on her knees, her eyes focused on the flowing water. There was a calmness about her, but also an alertness that reminded John of how capable and intelligent she was. He knew he could not force her, he could only guide her. The plan would require trust, courage, and patience. And he knew, deep down, that she deserved the chance to choose freedom for herself. John began by securing supplies. He gathered food, water, blankets, and basic tools, everything they would need for the journey through the wilderness. He packed lightly, knowing that speed and discretion were essential. Every item had to serve a purpose. Every movement had to be precise. He reviewed the routes he had memorized over the past weeks, noting streams, forests, and hills that would provide cover and safety. The plan was risky, but he felt a quiet certainty. This was the right thing to do. The guards followed their usual routines, patrolling at predictable times, eating at predictable times, and keeping their attention focused on the outpost rather than the surrounding land. John observed them closely, noting their habits, their blind spots, and the moments when their attention would drift. He understood that the success of the plan depended on timing, on patience, and on moving when the guards least expected it. Every step of the way had to be calculated, every risk accounted for, but he also knew that flexibility would be necessary. The wilderness was unpredictable, and so was life. He approached her enclosure quietly, avoiding the shadows cast by the wooden fences. She looked up as he neared, her eyes meeting his with a calm curiosity. For a moment, no words were spoken. John reached into his pack and offered her a small piece of bread and a water bottle. She accepted it without hesitation, her trust in him evident in her careful movements. This simple act of sharing was more than survival. It was a bond, built on respect and understanding. He nodded slightly, signaling that tonight would be different. As night deepened, they moved carefully, quietly, avoiding the paths and lights of the outpost. John led the way, scanning the surroundings for any sign of movement or danger. The woman followed, her steps light and deliberate. Every sound, the rustle of leaves, the snap of a twig, could alert a guard or a wandering animal, but they moved with care and focus. John marveled at her awareness and her ability to adapt quickly. She was strong, brave, and capable, and he realized that she had already begun to teach him about resilience, courage, and the meaning of freedom. The first stretch of their journey took them through the edge of the forest, where shadows and moonlight created patterns that both concealed and revealed the path ahead. John paused occasionally, listening for sounds of pursuit or danger. He signaled her to wait silently, then moved forward a few steps to ensure the coast was clear. Each step was deliberate, each movement careful, but there was a rhythm to their progress, a rhythm that spoke of trust and shared purpose. At one point, they reached a small stream. The water was cold and clear, and it reflected the moonlight like a ribbon of silver. John knelt and filled their water containers, careful not to make a sound. She watched him quietly, then bent down to take a sip from the stream. Her movements were precise and thoughtful, showing both skill and respect for the land. John felt a surge of admiration for her, realizing again that this journey was not only a test of courage, but also a recognition of her strength and independence. As they continued, the terrain became more challenging. Hills rose steeply, and the forest thickened, with roots and undergrowth making every step difficult. John led carefully, ensuring they avoided broken branches and loose stones that could cause noise or injury. The woman followed, moving silently as if she had been born to navigate the wilderness. Her presence was calming, yet inspiring, and John felt his determination grow stronger with every step. He knew that the success of their journey depended not only on careful planning, but also on mutual respect and understanding. Hours passed, and the distant lights of the outpost disappeared behind them. The forest grew denser, the air cooler, and the sounds of the night more pronounced. John kept them moving steadily, guiding her through narrow paths, over small streams, and around obstacles that would have slowed or endangered them. The journey was not easy, but neither of them spoke of fear. Instead, they moved with purpose, each step a commitment to the freedom that awaited beyond the trees and hills. At one point, they stopped to rest near a cluster of large rocks. John handed her a small piece of bread, and they shared a quiet meal under the stars. The sky was vast, filled with constellations that seemed almost to guide them. In the silence, John realized that this journey was about more than escape. It was about trust, courage, and the recognition of a human spirit that refused to be confined. He looked at her and felt a profound respect for her resilience and intelligence. She had survived captivity without losing her dignity, and now she was moving toward freedom with grace and determination. After the brief rest, they continued. The night was long, but John's resolve never wavered. He had planned for every eventuality, yet he knew the journey could change in an instant. Wild animals, unpredictable terrain, and the possibility of discovery loomed over them, but he focused on the task at hand. Every step brought them closer to freedom, and every step reinforced his belief that they were doing the right thing. As dawn approached, the forest began to lighten, revealing glimpses of the world beyond the trees. They paused on a hilltop, looking down at a valley below. The woman's eyes lit up with recognition, and John could see a flicker of hope and relief in her expression. The valley was vast and open, filled with rivers, trees, and distant mountains. It was a world that belonged to her, a world she could move through freely without fear or confinement. John felt a surge of satisfaction, knowing that their journey was nearing a turning point. The final stretch of the escape required them to move quickly and quietly through open land. John scanned the area carefully, ensuring no signs of pursuit. The woman followed closely, her trust in him evident in every step. He realized that this journey was no longer just about planning and caution. It was about courage, instinct, and the willingness to act despite uncertainty. Together, they navigated the last obstacles, guided by determination, respect, and a shared understanding of what freedom meant. By mid-morning, they reached the edge of the wilderness, far enough from the outpost to be safe for the moment. The woman paused, taking in the landscape with a look of awe and relief. John watched her, feeling a deep sense of accomplishment and satisfaction. He had risked everything, defied orders, and faced countless dangers, but the sight of her free and unafraid made it all worthwhile. In that moment, he understood the true meaning of courage. Not just the bravery to face danger, but the bravery to do what is right, even when it comes at great personal cost. As Part 4 closes, John and the woman stand together at the edge of freedom, the outpost and its walls far behind them. Their journey has been difficult, full of tension, planning, and careful action, yet it has also been filled with trust, respect, and courage. The escape is complete, but the journey of life ahead is only beginning. For John, the experience has transformed him, teaching him about empathy, justice, and the power of human spirit. For the woman, it is the first step back to the life she deserves, free, unconfined, and filled with possibility. The morning air was crisp and filled with the sounds of the wilderness. Birds sang, leaves rustled, and the river below gurgled gently as if welcoming the new day. The woman stood on the edge of the valley, looking out at the world she had longed for, a world free from walls, fences, and confinement. Her eyes sparkled with a quiet joy, the kind that only comes from reclaiming something precious that was once taken away. John stood beside her, observing her from a careful distance. He did not speak immediately. Words were not necessary. The air between them was filled with understanding, relief, and an unspoken acknowledgement of the journey they had shared. They had walked through forests, over hills, and along streams. They had navigated dangers that could have ended everything. And now, finally, the wilderness lay open before them. The woman breathed deeply, taking in the scent of pine, earth, and flowing water. It was a smell of life, freedom, and endless possibilities. She turned to John briefly, offering a small, grateful smile. For a moment he felt a sense of quiet pride, not for himself, but for her. She had survived, she had endured, and she had triumphed. John knew their paths would soon diverge. His duty to protect her was complete, but she belonged to the land, to her people, and to her life beyond him. Still, the bond they had formed was undeniable. Over weeks of observation, careful planning, and silent communication, they had learned to trust each other completely. That trust had carried them through danger and uncertainty. Now, standing on the edge of her freedom, John felt a mixture of joy and sorrow. Joy for her, sorrow for the separation that was inevitable. The woman knelt briefly beside a patch of wildflowers, touching them with gentle care. John watched, noting the way her fingers moved with reverence and familiarity. It reminded him of her connection to the land, a bond that had not been broken by captivity. He realized that freedom was not just about physical space. It was about belonging, understanding, and harmony with one's environment. And she had it now, more fully than he could ever give her. After a long silence, she finally spoke, her voice soft but steady. "Thank you," she said, and in that simple phrase was a lifetime of meaning, gratitude, acknowledgement, and recognition of his courage. John nodded, his throat tight, unable to find words that could capture the emotions he felt. The journey had changed him profoundly. He had learned that courage was not just about facing danger, but about standing up for what is right, even when the world expected obedience. They began to move together through the valley, taking care to stay hidden from distant settlements. Every step was deliberate, cautious, but also filled with a sense of freedom and purpose. John guided her, pointing out landmarks, water sources, and safe paths. Yet he also allowed her to lead at times, recognizing her deep understanding of the land. It was a partnership built on mutual respect, and it strengthened with every mile they traveled. The landscape opened up gradually. Rivers wound through the valleys, hills rolled gently, and forests stretched endlessly toward distant mountains. The woman's face reflected awe and relief at each new vista, her spirit reconnecting with the life she had been denied for so long. John noticed the change in her posture, the light in her eyes, and the way her movements became more relaxed, more natural. She was reclaiming herself, step by step, breath by breath. Along the way, they encountered challenges. A fallen tree blocked their path through the forest. Loose rocks threatened to twist an ankle. Wild animals rustled in the underbrush. Yet, each obstacle was met with patience, observation, and teamwork. John marveled at her resourcefulness, her courage, and her adaptability. She had endured so much, yet never lost her dignity or her determination. Every moment reinforced his belief that helping her escape had been not only right, but necessary. At one point, they reached a clearing that overlooked a wide valley filled with sunlight. The woman paused, taking in the expanse before her. She breathed deeply, letting the wind fill her lungs. John watched silently, recognizing the significance of the moment. It was not merely a physical space they had reached. It was a symbol of freedom, hope, and the life that awaited her. He felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He had taken a risk, defied authority, and faced danger, but he had succeeded. More importantly, she had succeeded in reclaiming her life. As they rested in the clearing, John reflected on the journey they had shared. He thought about the days of quiet observation, the nights of planning and worry, and the moments of silent communication that had brought them here. He realized that this journey had changed him as much as it had changed her. He had learned about empathy, moral courage, and the importance of recognizing the humanity in others. He had learned that true bravery comes not only from facing danger, but from standing up for what is right, even when it is difficult or unpopular. The woman finally spoke again, her voice soft but firm. "I must go now," she said. There was no sadness in her tone, only acceptance and a quiet strength. John nodded, understanding completely. He had known this moment would come. She belonged to the land, to her life, and to the freedom that was now hers. He could not follow her beyond this point, but he had given her the greatest gift he could, an opportunity to reclaim herself. Before parting ways, she turned to him one last time. Her eyes met his, and in that gaze was a mixture of gratitude, respect, and acknowledgement. It was more powerful than any words could convey. John felt a lump in his throat, but he held his ground, knowing that this separation was right. She stepped forward, disappearing into the forest with a grace and confidence that reflected her spirit. Each step carried her further from captivity and closer to a life of her own choosing. John watched until she was out of sight, the sounds of her movements fading into the distance. He felt a mixture of relief, pride, and quiet sorrow. Their journey had been dangerous and difficult, yet it had also been transformative. He had witnessed the power of the human spirit, the strength of courage, and the importance of freedom. And though they would not walk the same path again, the bond they had formed would remain, a memory of shared struggle, trust, and triumph. As he began the journey back toward the settlement, John felt a sense of peace he had not known in years. He would face the consequences of his actions. He knew the council would question his disobedience, but he no longer feared them. The knowledge that he had done what was right, that he had helped restore freedom to someone who deserved it, gave him a profound sense of satisfaction. His life had been changed, not by the dangers he faced, but by the courage and dignity of the woman he had helped. Along the way, he reflected on the lessons he had learned. He thought about the importance of empathy, of seeing people as individuals rather than objects to control. He considered the meaning of courage, not simply the ability to face danger, but the willingness to act with integrity, even when it comes at a personal cost. He realized that freedom was a treasure worth protecting, not only for oneself but for others. And most of all, he understood that true connection comes not from possession or control, but from respect, trust, and understanding. As John returned to the settlement, he felt different, changed in ways he could not yet fully describe. He had completed his mission, not by following orders but by following his conscience. He had faced risks, defied authority, and taken responsibility for his actions, and he had emerged with a deeper understanding of life, courage, and morality. The woman's freedom had become a symbol of hope, not only for her, but for him as well. The story concludes with the understanding that freedom, trust, and courage are universal values that transcend fear, authority, and confinement. The woman was safe, free, and returning to the life that belonged to her, while John had discovered the strength of conscience and the power of empathy. Their paths had diverged, but the impact of their journey remained, a testament to the courage of the human spirit, the importance of doing what is right, and the transformative power of trust and understanding. Though the outpost faded behind him, the lessons and memories endured. John would carry the experience with him for the rest of his life, the quiet moments, the shared silences, the careful planning, and the ultimate triumph of freedom. And the woman, now walking through her own land, carried with her the gift of choice, the power of autonomy, and the proof that courage, even in the face of oppression, can change a life forever.